Ocean, and they never really belonged to either place wholly. But as they grew older, the doors of China closed in 1949, and their home, they couldn't go home. It's almost, you can't go home again. And then it opened up again. All of the Americans born in China, including Pearl Buck, wanted to go home. And I got to bring my father home, and when I took him home, it opened up a whole new world in 2001 for me, that this was his motherland, and therefore it was my own. So I'm going to do a quick PowerPoint presentation about Lushan, because I ended up being the president of the Kuling American School Association. Pearl Buck attended in 1906 for like one semester, and her mother said, "Oh, that's not for me." But Pearl Buck and her family story in Lushan has never been told in the way that I'm going to tell it today. So this is Mount Lushan. It's one of the 10 foundations of Chinese civilization. It wasn't just when the white man discovered it in 1896, because it was very cool and beautiful. It has been there, the home of priests, sages, and poets in China for thousands of years. And it's fundamentally the home of Buddhism and Taoism also. At one time, there were 1,000 temples on this beautiful mountain that rises up above the Yangtze River Valley. It's also famous for the world's longest movie running in Kuling called Love in Lushan. It is the worst movie. It's a fantastic film where the first kiss after the Cultural Revolution on screen shocked the country. I have some pictures of Andrew, as they called him, or Dr. Sai is what he was called. He was a young man also from the Virginia area, the father, and Absalom, my family called him Dr. Sai. And when we first went there, Pearl Buck was already there. Our family went in the 1880s, three brothers named Woods, okay? And what I want to talk about is that actually the beginning experience of the 1880s in the Presbyterian missionaries was very difficult. They hadn't built any hospitals yet in their missions. They started in Hangzhou. There were only 12 missionaries to begin with. And we had Zhenzhu, Sai Zhenzhu is Pearl's name. So they took Dr. Sai and they called her Sai for Hansberger, and Zhenzhu means pearl. She was actually also known in her family as Jean. So where are we? Okay, so here we are. Northern Jiangsu is actually the area that we were operating in. And I don't know why I did that. Okay, so here we go. Here's Pearl and Grace in 1900. So think 1892, Pearl is born in the United States. And at 5 months, Andrew wants to go home. So Pearl came on the heels of the death of 3 children before the age of 5. And in 1890, 2 of her sisters and brothers died in 1 month on the canal boat on the way to Shanghai. The second baby contracted cholera, and they were both buried. Okay. This picture I just found in 1904. I don't think this is 1904, but one of the things you notice about this is the 3 women: Grace Hansberger, Pearl, and their mother, Carrie. And I was struck by the fact that Pearl and Grace look so much alike in this picture. And these come from the archives at her house in West Virginia. Come back. So this is a Google Maps view of the world of where these people were. Okay, so if you look here, here's Shanghai, here's the Yellow Sea, and here's Jiangsu Province. Okay, here's the Yangtze River, here's Zhenjiang. This is the Grand Canal right here. So going back in this period of time in China, there were no roads, there were no trails, there's barely no way to get around. It's the waterways. So there, from Shanghai, my grandfather lived on a houseboat, and there were canals all the way through here to get here. But this is where Pearl Buck grew up at her home in Zhenjiang. This is a map showing the Presbyterians on the Yangtze. The Southern Presbyterians, by the way, we separated the church. So this comes from a book by a guy named Tommy Brown, who did the history. So here you have Taizhou, you have Huai'an, you have Anhui over here, and here's Zhenjiang, Nanjing, and Shanghai. So my family actually moved in with Pearl Buck in 1912 for 1 year and lived with Dr. Tsai and Carrie. And that's how we got connected. And then moved to Taizhou in 1913, and that was a station that was also founded by Absalom. So Absalom founded the 3 towns that my family lived in, and actually Huai'an became, they also called it Qingjiangpu. Qingjiangpu is where Pearl and her family moved. It's actually, they moved there in 1886, I think. So they lived further north from Zhenjiang for about 8 years. I took some of the photos, and some of the story come from The Exile's Daughter, which is written by Grace Seidenstricker. And what's nice about this book is it was written during World War II. So the memories of Grace, of her childhood, she's not old yet. So Pearl wrote My Several Worlds when she was getting older. So Grace wrote this at an earlier time. And in the book, there's these beautiful photos. That's the temple in Zhenjiang that is described in My Several Worlds that she remembers looking out the window. Golden Island with its pagoda. These are the amas that were very powerful. And I think one of the things we heard this morning was the power of the women in the life of Pearl Buck. And you don't understand that, I think it was Hilary Sperling wrote, the first chapter of her book, Pearl Buck in China, is called House of Ghosts. And it talks that Pearl Buck entered a world that was filled with the ghosts of 3 siblings that were gone. And they were alive to me, she writes, because her mother had lost 3 children. If anybody knows anybody's ever lost a child, it's a life-changing experience. And to lose 3, if not finally 4, this transformed the life of Pearl's mother, that forever she was trying to manifest in her own psyche, in her own work, and in her own life, of how she was not going to be in the same life conditions as her mother. This is what the missionaries look like, okay? And this is actually in Huai'an. You'll see they all wore Chinese clothes. This is 1891. This is a PowerPoint from my great-grandfather's brother. He founded the first hospital in Huai'an called Rensi Yiyuan. Okay, so they even have names up here. One of them is called Glorious, one of them is called Mr. Lee, Mr. Thunder, and one guy is called Big Pig. I think that was not very nice. This is my great-grandfather's brother and the foundational first doctor in the Presbyterian Church. And this guy here, this is James Graham. James Graham was the evangelist in Huai'an who didn't really appreciate Andrew Seidenstricker. And this is my family in the missionary compound in Xinjiangpu. And this is my grandmother in the middle. This is the guy that translated the Bible for the Presbyterian Church. And that Pearl Buck's father didn't like his translation because it was too aristocratic. And he wanted to do it in the language of the peasants, okay? So Henry Woods, all of my great-grandfathers, they spoke Latin, Greek, and Chinese. And they often, when they read the Bible, they went to the Greek and the Latin to understand the scriptures. What they ended up doing in China was less of making Christians, but more of providing humanitarian service. So this is the series of how you get around in China in the 1880s, okay? This is a missionary on an expedition with his sleeping bag, riding a donkey. That's how Absalom started. This is a wheelbarrow. This is my grandfather in Taizhou, and he's got his sleeping bag there. And he's wearing a bow tie, so he must be preaching that day. I threw this one in because I love the picture. First of all, it's a bunch of kids in Taizhou holding puppies. And they're all standing up there smiling.
There's a cat.
Is there a cat in there? Okay. Well, here's the puppy. Here's the puppies over here. But what I really like is the back side of this picture. And it says, when we ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? We want to be alive. Shall we Americans give them a chance? Okay? That's my grandmother. They ended up building, the missionaries, it's a dirty word in China to be a missionary because they came on the backs of the gunboat was followed by the Bible. Okay? So if you try to publish a book about a missionary in China right now, you'll have a hard time getting it past the censor. But the truth was, many of these became humanitarians. And even Pearl Buck, when she wrote, "Are the missions really necessary?" She wrote, "Bring me your hospitals, bring me your famine relief, your flood relief, your war refugee relief. Bring me your ideas against opium and against foot binding. But we have plenty of gods of our own over here." It's a bit, as we look back on it now, even our own families, that was a different time period, okay? But I really think this is, when I found this, is should we Americans give the children a chance? This is the picture of my family arriving in Zhenjiang in 1912. And that's my grandfather's right here. This is Lainey Gillespie, and this is a woman named Vivian. And Vivian became the mother of Sue Grafton, the American author. A is for alibi, B is for burglar. Vivian Grafton was her married name. So they did arrive in 1912 at Pearl Buck's house. Here's being carried by sedan chair. This is a typical canal scene. I know exactly where this is. This is when you came down from Zhenjiang. This is on Suzhou Creek, where there's in Shanghai. They parked their houseboats. And there was usually a wild traffic jam on the canals where they would be yelling and hollering at each other. The Chinese insult each other by comparing the person's ancestors to lower forms of being. And usually the women that speak vernacular Chinese are the best at that. This is like the houseboat with sails. And let me just jump through these. This is the houseboat that my family lived on. And so our family actually lived 6 months out of the year on a houseboat with a pump organ, a German Shepherd, 3 brothers named Wong, and a cook named Fok Shing. Okay? And my father learned to swim on this boat when he was poling the little boat behind it, and the boat went away. He was on a pole in the middle of the canal, right? So they were houseboaters, and they were the only family that lived in a houseboat in northern Jiangsu. And because they knew all the canals, this would later prove to be extremely helpful during the Japanese invasion. Because the Japanese blocked the Grand Canal, they blocked the Yangtze River, and only a missionary with a bucket full of money going to Shanghai could come up and find his way up without the Japanese stopping them. I just like this one. This is what the houseboat looked like as a junk. And so that's, when my father went home, we went home to Taichung in 2001. I brought Weijia, I brought my dad home. I want to go to my 5 homes, he said. And I go, what? I want to go to Taichung, I want to go to Huai'an, I want to go to Zhenjiang, I want to go to Lushan. Okay? And I was like, wow, okay. And we got to go. And the first thing he wanted to do was go on the Grand Canal. Because that was his youthful experience. This is actually our houseboat being towed by a steam barge. And if you read in Pearl Buck, when they're riding on the boats, when they go from Zhenjiang to Huai'an, it was not a pleasant experience. Bugs and rats and Chinese peeping through, wondering what the foreign devils, they called us Da Bizi, which means big nose, right? Big nose, right? And Yang Guizi, which is foreign devil. And my father used to be called Xiao Yang Guizi, which means little foreign devil. And so they would shout back to the Chinese kids, Chinese devils, little Chinese devils. This is one of my grandfather's shots. I talk about how this is what it looked like on the canals. It's like the sea of humanity coming to port. It's kind of like the main intersection of 476 and God knows what exit I took. This shows the 3 Wong brothers. There actually is a footpath, and it often isn't, there's no wind. So a missionary would travel and they would write in their diary, I only went 6 li today, and 6 li is about a mile or 2 miles. We didn't get anywhere. So they have a footpath and they would pull. Many of the stories on the houseboat and what have you are of whirlpools in the Yangtze River, typhoons on Bellevue Lake, and the Great Flood of 1931. This is you can see this is all the kids. These are all My Several Worlds people here in the Taizhou mission, and this is in 1931 in Taizhou, and that was the families that my father grew up with. The Zhenjiang Railway Station, this is when they first built the Zhenjiang Railroad. This is in My Several Worlds. It was a big deal. And here's just a few shots of what it was like in caring for war and flood refugees. They became the soup kitchens. They became the war refugee places. They were the only organized body of government in northern Jiangsu was the missionaries. Their warlords ran the whole territory, and they dealt with the warlords, and they treated them in the hospitals. They often drove out, and fixed their toothaches, literally. Somebody had a problem. So what happened was to the Buck family was the loss of 3 children. And Carrie was nearly destroyed, probably was destroyed. She demanded to come home. They hadn't been on furlough in 10 years. And furlough is every 7 to 10 years you come back to America and spend a year here. So she also got sick on the boat. She lost Maud on a ship on the way back from Japan. That was the first baby that died. She was only 1. And so Andrew brought her back to the United States, and they stayed in West Virginia, and Pearl was born in 1892, okay? And the death of the children, this is writing, this is from My Several Worlds, is there was a guy in Lushan, a missionary, named E.S. Little, and Absalom knew him, and he had gone up and basically forged a deed of property, because he knew it was, River City is Zhejiang. Zhejiang is really hot, like Zhenjiang. It's really, really hot. So he'd gone up on the hill and saw this beautiful, cool mountain and decided to make a summer place to get cool. So he told Absalom, and Absalom's words were, "Up there in Lushan, the air is like the Alleghenies, and the brooks run clear." They actually thought of Lushan as home. They actually described it. It's as close to home as we could find, and that is the home of Carrie they're speaking of. Home is in the mountains of West Virginia that it reminded them of. So in 1896 is when Lushan was founded by E.S. Little, and it was a clear forged property deed that he created this land. It was not legal to own land in the mountain. Only the priests could own the mountain lands. I don't think any of us really knew the true story of how they got Lushan. But Lushan became the premier summer resort in all of China. Mao went there, Chiang Kai-shek had a villa, it was just really, everyone went there. And so fathers built us a house in the mountains. And Kuling was actually, they changed the name of a peak that was called Kuling to Kuling to make it so for cooling off, okay? And this is what Pearl wrote, was each June when the rice seedlings were transplanted from the dry beds to the flooded fields, I knew the time had come for Kuling. So they would go every year. 1897 is the first year that Lushan was opened, and the Bucks were one of the first 5 families to lease property for 99 years. This being because Absalom Hansberger knew that in summer, that's when the diseases had killed all the babies. It was the tropical diseases of cholera, malaria, and diphtheria, and all sorts of things that would come over in the summertime. So they go here, and this is when Pearl Buck's birthday, I think, is in June.
Yes.
Right? June, right. So she says, "I'll give up my birthday if I get to go to Lushan every year," and they would go June to September. So in their whole lives, and they did that all the way up, and she was married there and honeymooned there. Pearl Buck decided to become a writer in August of 1922 in Lushan, when she wrote her first magazine article, In China Too, I believe it was called.
So inside of it, they call it the importance of Kuling. It is not understood that it was the life-saving station. I like this one. You know, the coolies, which is not a very great word. This is a quote from one of the words. The cicadas sing in the trees like the mountains loom against the sky. Pearl wrote about the cicadas here on this property, reminding her of the cicadas, of the 1,000 steps. This is the 1,000-step trail that carried them up the hill. This is a picture of one of the boats arriving at Lushan, and this is what it looked like in 1896. Bull Peak is what Kuling was, and this is E.S. Literal in the story of Kuling, and this is what it looks like 25 years later. And E.S. Little's great-grandson in Australia sent me a whole bunch of photos recently from this area, which are the founder of Kuling. So this is the 1,000 steps. The Chinese don't call them the 1,000 steps. They were actually carved by stoneworkers. The Chinese have a different perspective because they were the chair bearers. And they would often look at the size of the missionary and say, "You carry her." Okay? And actually, there's one quote that they thought that, you know, Absalom was, you know, oh, he's really tall, because they're looking at, you know, how much is the package, right? And he's really tall, but one of them says, he doesn't have much meat. Okay? So they were okay with Absalom. But the 1,000 steps are a metaphor for anyone that went to Lushan in this period, because they all remember them. And this is Pearl writing in My Several Worlds. The importance of Kuling's in the life of the white people. There were other summer resorts, we felt. It was much more than a summer resort. It was a life-saving station. That's the most important, that actually her mother, Carrie, said, "You don't understand. Maybe we shouldn't have created a separate white-only community in China. It was an estate that had its own laws, its own police, and, you know, it was extraterritorial." They almost said that, right? But she said, we probably have to give this back to the Chinese, but nobody understands. We did it for the children. We lost so many children. That's really what it meant to the Bucks. And every year, they went to this place. Now when you get there, it's a little bit more crowded, but you can tell it became wildly popular, and many, many people came here. There's a book called Lushan Memories that was put together by the American children that all went home in the 1980s, that went to school at the Kuling American School. And when China opened up, these bicultural kids, all of them went home. And they created a book of their memories, they wrote articles, and they described the place as Shangri-La. And it was. It's waterfalls, it's swimming pools, it's Black Dragon Falls, it's Yellow Dragon, you know, everything's got a dragon in it, by the way. So here's the Pearl Buck House now. This was last October. They were starting to clean it up a bit.